War does not begin with gunfire. It begins quietly, in places where men still believe tomorrow will come. This land once grew wheat. Children once ran through these fields. And now, it waits for blood. His name was Elias Kovač. He was 21 years old. He had never traveled farther than his village, never fired a weapon at another human being. And yet, on this morning, the weight of a war older than him rested on his back. History would never remember his name. There would be no medals, no statues, just another body listed as lost in a war too large to count its dead properly. 3 months earlier, Elias was home. The war was still something people argued about in taverns, something far away. He left before the fighting reached his village, not because he wanted glory, but because he believed staying behind would make him a coward. War has a way of punishing belief. The moment Elias arrived at the front, he understood the lie. There were no heroes here, only men trying not to die. The trenches smelled of wet earth, unwashed bodies, and fear that never left. Men stopped talking after their first night. Silence became survival. He carried one letter with him, written by his younger sister. She told him the crops were growing well, that the dog still slept by his bed. She ended it with 3 words: "Come back alive." That morning, the ground trembled for the first time. Not enough to panic, just enough to warn them. The war was waking up. In that moment, Elias understood something no training had prepared him for. War does not ask if you are ready. It only asks how much of you it can take. And as the sun rose over the trenches, the first orders were given. By nightfall, nothing would be the same. They told him to brace, to stay low, but nothing could prepare Elias for what comes after the calm. The world holds its breath, and then the war begins. The first shell landed like a hammer. The ground shook beneath him. The air smelled of fire and iron. Men screamed, some prayed, some were already gone. Elias gripped his rifle tighter, heart hammering, fingers numb. No man's land stretched before him, a wasteland of mud, wire, and shattered earth. This was where men came to die, not heroes, not victors, just bodies waiting to be counted. Elias looked around, faces pale, eyes hollow, each man holding onto some fragment of hope. Some whispered names of loved ones, some stared at the mud, trying not to see what was coming. And Elias, he whispered a promise to survive. Not for glory, not for country, but for home. And then they came, shapes in the smoke, faces unseen, but intent unmistakable. Gunfire erupted. The world contracted into the barrel of a rifle. Elias fired, and the first life he took burned into him forever. His friend fell beside him, blood soaking the mud. Elias dragged him to cover, not out of bravery, but instinct. War didn't give him courage. It demanded action, and each action left a mark he would carry long after. In that moment, Elias understood fully. Death is patient. It waits in the mud, behind every scream, in every shadow. And sometimes, there is no choice but to survive it. When the firing stopped, silence returned. But it was not peace. His friend, gone, others missing, and Elias, still breathing. Survival was hollow. Victory was meaningless. And yet, the war pressed forward. He touched the letter in his pocket. The promise from home. Alive. That was all it meant now. Alive to see another sunrise. If there was one, the war had truly begun. And Elias was no longer just a boy from a village. He was a witness, a survivor, a man learning what it costs to live when others die around you. The morning was deceptive, calm, almost peaceful, but the air carried the metallic scent of fear. Men whispered names of home. Some muttered prayers. Elias gripped his rifle. Every nerve in his body screamed what he already knew. This day would take lives. No man's land stretched like a scar across the earth. Broken wood, mud, and the remains of what had been homes. Elias' heart pounded as he imagined what lay beyond the wire. Men just like him, waiting to die, or to kill. The order came suddenly, over the top. Instantly, the trench became a cage. Men rose as one, hearts hammering, feet sinking in mud, rifles ready. For Elias, it was no longer abstract. The war had arrived, and it wanted everything. The first man fell in front of him. Not a name, not a hero, just a body. Mud and blood mixed in a way that made the world feel wrong. Elias' fingers itched to fire, but his stomach twisted in a way he could not control. The battlefield does not wait for readiness. It demands survival. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Men screamed, some in pain, some in terror. Elias fired again and again. Each shot a heartbeat, each breath a battle with himself. He wondered how many of these men had families, wives waiting, sisters praying, and now they were gone. His comrade fell beside him, a hole in his shoulder. Elias dragged him to cover, not for glory, not for honor, but because he had to. Survival was not enough if you could not protect the living. He saw death everywhere, in the mud, in the screams, in the silence between explosions. Each moment pressed down on him, a weight heavier than any rifle, and he realized the truth. War does not simply take men, it strips them bare. There was no time to grieve, no time to even think of fear. The world had condensed to survival. Move, shoot, breathe, repeat. When the gunfire paused, the battlefield was a graveyard. Men he had eaten, laughed, or trained with were gone. Elias touched the letter in his pocket. Still there, still a tether to the world he once knew. Alive. That was all that mattered now. And even that came at a cost. The first real battle had passed, and Elias Kovač was no longer a boy. He was a witness to death, a participant in history, and the war was far from over.
The guns had fallen silent, but the war did not stop. Silence was worse than fire. It pressed down on Elias' chest like a stone. Every scream he couldn't help, echoed in his mind. The men around him breathed quietly, but their eyes were hollow. Alive, but not untouched. Elias' hand still trembled. He touched the letter in his pocket. Home felt impossible. The promise of life outside these trenches seemed like a lie. The faces of those he had watched die burned behind his eyelids. He wondered if surviving was a gift or a punishment. Before the war, laughter came easily. The sun warmed the skin, not gunpowder. That boy, that farm boy, felt like another person entirely. He reached for that memory now because in the trenches, the past was all he had left. The men moved quietly, tending wounds or staring at nothing. Conversations were whispers, punctuated by the occasional groan or curse. Elias realized that survival demanded more than strength. It demanded the numbness to see death, to keep moving while the world around you burned. He found a helmet, a friend's helmet, still warm in the mud. And for a moment, he felt rage, grief, and helplessness all at once. There was no time for tears, only the weight of survival, heavy on his shoulders. He realized something vital. Life in these trenches was not measured in days, but in breath. Each inhale a victory, each exhale a reminder of what had been lost. And every choice, every movement, carried the cost of someone else's life. He pressed the letter to his chest. It smelled faintly of parchment and hope. Alive. That word had become a prayer. The war was no longer about honor or duty. It was about surviving another night and holding on to the last piece of himself that still remembered home. The night was alive with whispers of death, some from men, some from the wind. Elias could hear every heartbeat, every creak of wood, every sigh in the mud. War had a language, and it spoke only in pain. He held the rifle, not as a weapon, but as a lifeline. It reminded him that as long as he clutched it, he could survive. And survival was everything now. The first night of survival passed, but Elias Kovač knew the war was not finished. It would not forgive. It would not rest, and neither could he. Dawn came slowly, almost cruelly. The silence of the night had done nothing to heal the wounds. The bodies of men who had fallen yesterday lay half buried in mud, their faces turned to the sky as if searching for mercy. Elias sat against the trench wall, rifle across his knees, numbness in his fingers, and a weight on his chest heavier than any artillery shell. He felt every sound, the faint creak of a board, the whisper of wind, the distant rumble of cannons. Each echo reminded him, The war had not ended. It would not forgive. Survival was no longer instinct, it was a burden. Around him, men prepared again. Fingers froze around rifles. Eyes scanned the horizon. Each soldier carried the ghosts of the night before. And Elias, he carried them all within himself. The first shells fell before orders could be given. Explosions tore holes in the earth and ripped through the air like angry spirits. Mud and blood sprayed across the trenches. Elias pressed himself flat, feeling the tremor of each impact through the soles of his boots. He wondered how many men would not see the next sunrise. Orders were shouted, but they barely registered. Instinct took over. Move forward. Keep low, survive. Elias' feet sank into mud with every step. His lungs burned. Every muscle screamed. But the war demanded he keep moving. And ahead, only more chaos awaited. Men fell around him. Not far, not close, but within the radius of life and death that defined the battlefield. Elias' friend collapsed, blood soaking the mud. There was no time to mourn. Survival demanded action, not grief. He carried the weight of every man who would not rise again. His hands burned from tension. Every trigger pull a testament to the world's cruelty. War had transformed him already, not into a hero, not into a soldier, into a witness, a man forced to keep moving while the earth claimed his friends. Moments of reprieve were rare. Mud-caked faces stared into nothing. Wounded moaned quietly. And Elias, he counted the living. Survival was measured in breaths, in heartbeats, in the silence between explosions. He touched the letter in his pocket. The words from home felt distant, almost unreal. Yet they tethered him to something beyond the mud, beyond the screams. Something worth surviving for. Alive. One more day. That was all he could promise himself. The sun rose fully, and the battle would continue. Elias Kovač understood one truth clearly. War did not end. It only paused long enough to draw breath, before claiming more lives. The morning had stretched into hours. Artillery fire never truly stopped. Elias' legs ached, his lungs burned, and the mud seemed to suck away not just his boots, but his strength. He realized something terrifying. Exhaustion was not just physical. It was a weapon of the war itself. Every sound, the screams, the gunfire, the whistle of falling shells, grated on his nerves. Fear had become a constant companion, but now despair joined it. He understood, with chilling clarity, that war could break a man without firing a single bullet at him. Around him, men fell. Faces he had seen that morning, that week, gone. He reached out to pull one back into the trench, but the mud and weight made it impossible. Survival demanded choices, but each choice carved a scar into his soul. Orders shouted, guns firing. But Elias moved like a shadow, numb to the chaos. No longer thinking of home, no longer thinking of glory, only of keeping one foot in front of the other. For now, in his eyes, the battlefield had settled. Not horror, not courage. Numbness, and yet, beneath the numbness, the boy from the village still flickered, waiting somewhere for a chance to survive or to die with meaning. He dragged a friend behind cover. The weight of him seemed heavier than the world itself. The friend whispered something, a name, a plea, but Elias could not respond. His body was empty, and his mind far away. Survival had become automatic, humanity optional. And then, for a heartbeat, silence. Not peace, not safety. Just a lull in the endless storm. Elias' fingers traced the letter in his pocket. Home. Hope. Life. He had survived another round, but at what cost? He remembered the boy who had left the village weeks ago. The boy who had laughed and dreamed of fields and family. That boy was gone. In his place was a man forged by mud, blood, and fire. A man who knew that surviving the day was no victory at all. And yet, the world demanded it again. Another push. Another wave of bullets. Another round of death. There was no choice but to follow orders, to move forward, to survive. Elias' heart beat not for courage, but simply to keep going. The breaking point had passed, but the war did not rest. Elias Kovač knew one truth. There would be no heroes here, only survivors, and he would have to endure, one breath at a time. The ground trembled again. The world seemed to shrink to the size of the mud beneath his boots. Every step out of the trench was a gamble with death, and today, death came closer than ever. A shell landed just meters away. Mud and wood splintered against his face. For a heartbeat, he was certain this was the end. But the world did not cling in. Not yet. Gunfire erupted from every direction. The world had become a tunnel of smoke, screams, and flying metal. He fired, not courage, not aim, but instinct. And somewhere, a man fell. Elias did not know his name. He did not know if he would live to know it. He fell, diving into the mud, crawling toward what little cover he could find. Every inch was agony, every breath a reminder of his mortality. For the first time, he felt the real weight of being expendable, and he hated it. His hand shook, not from fear, not exactly, from the constant awareness that any movement could be his last. Survival demanded everything and gave nothing in return. A friend beside him fell, blood soaked into mud. Elias grabbed him, trying to drag him back, but a second shell landed between them. For a moment, he understood that survival was not heroism. It was luck, sheer, brutal luck. Lying in the mud, watching the world burn, Elias asked himself one question: will I see tomorrow? And for the first time, he did not hope for victory, only that the next heartbeat would come. Instinct took over, not courage, not heroism. Survival, move forward. Keep alive, drag him forward. One step at a time. War demanded everything, and Elias gave it, but it would never be enough. He touched the letter again, a fragile tether to a world outside the mud, the blood, the screams. Alive. That word now carried weight heavier than any rifle. He had survived the first real brush with death, but the cost was written on his hands, his eyes, and his heart. The battle had passed, but only for a moment. Elias Kovač had faced death, and it had stared back, and he survived, for now. The battle had passed, leaving only ruin behind. Houses that once sheltered families were now hollow shells. Muddy craters swallowed bodies, and rifles alike. Elias walked among it all, a witness to devastation he could never unsee. He had survived again, but with every day, every battle, something inside him changed. Fear remained, but it had been tempered into something colder, caution. Grief remained, but it had become a silent companion. Elias Kovač was no longer the boy who left his village. He was something else entirely. Men cried out in pain, others muttered names. Elias acted automatically, patching wounds, dragging the living to cover. Survival was no longer a fight for himself alone. It was a duty, even if it was silent, even if it went unnoticed. The ruins told stories, families lost. Dreams shattered, lives ended before they truly began. Elias had seen the cost of war written on every wall, in every face, and in every corpse, and he carried it all inside him, like armor and chains at once. The letter remained in his pocket, a fragile link to the world outside the trenches. Alive, it reminded him of something worth holding onto, and yet each word felt distant, almost unreal. He had learned that the world outside could wait. Survival came first. Silence fell over the men. Not peace, not rest. Only the quiet that follows carnage, heavy and suffocating. Elias knew that tomorrow would demand more strength, more endurance, more of himself he could not give freely. His eyes no longer held innocence. They held calculation, awareness, a readiness born from loss, suffering, and repeated exposure to death. Elias Kovač had been transformed, not into a hero, not into a monster, into a survivor. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to remember the boy he once was. But only briefly. The war would not wait, and neither could he. The trenches were alive again. Movement, orders, anticipation. Another push. Another wave. Another round of death. Elias adjusted his helmet, gripped his rifle, and prepared. Because in war, there is no rest, only survival, and the weight of what it costs. Elias Kovač had survived. He had lost much, and yet he endured. War had taken innocence. War had taken peace. But it had not yet taken him. Dawn arrived slowly, as if the world itself hesitated to rise. The battlefield lay quiet, but only in appearance. Mud and craters marked where men had died, where hope had vanished. Elias Kovač moved through it all, silent, alone with the echoes of screams that never truly left. His hands trembled not from fear, but from exhaustion. His mind weighed heavy with memories of friends lost, lives ended, and dreams shattered. The boy who had left the village seemed like a ghost now, lingering in the corners of his mind. He was alive, but what did that mean anymore? The battlefield was eerily still. Only the wind carried whispers of the dead, rustling through barbed wire and broken wood. Each helmet, each splintered rifle, each mud-streaked body was a reminder of the cost. And yet, life went on. The sun rose, the birds sang. The earth waited for nothing. He touched a letter from home, words written in another world, another life, alive. That word had become both a blessing and a burden. War had taken innocence, peace, and certainty, but it had not yet taken him, and so he clung to it like a lifeline in the storm. Faces haunted him. Friends who had fallen yesterday, the day before. Men who had laughed, joked, hoped, now shadows in the mud. Elias carried their memories like stones in his chest, heavy and yielding, impossible to discard. He moved through the trench line like a shadow, not seeking glory, not seeking revenge, only moving forward, only surviving. Every breath a fight, every heartbeat a reminder that he had not yet joined those who lay in the mud. His eyes were weary, hollow yet sharp, guarded yet alert. He had seen death up close. He had felt fear. He had felt loss. And yet, he remained, alive, enduring, waiting for the next challenge the war would throw. The horizon stretched endlessly, smoke, fire, and mud blending into one endless scar. And Elias knew the war would not end here. But the boy who had left home, trembling and untested, was gone. In his place was a man forged by lost survival and the unyielding weight of reality. Another day awaited. Another wave of chaos, destruction, and death. Elias adjusted his helmet, gripped his rifle, and took a breath. Not for courage, not for glory, only to survive. One day more, one breath at a time. Dawn had come, but the war showed no mercy. Elias Kovač was alive, and that alone was enough for now. The sun hung low over a scarred earth. The guns had quieted, but only for a moment. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Mud, smoke, and fire marked the traces of men who would never rise again. And in the midst of it all, Elias Kovač remained. He had survived, not through courage, not through skill, but through endurance, sheer, unrelenting endurance. His hands were blistered. His body ached. His mind carried the weight of every life he could not save. War had taken much, and yet it had not taken him. The ruins whispered stories of what had been lost. Friends, families, dreams, all swallowed by mud and fire. Elias could feel the war inside him now, in his chest, in his eyes, in the trembling of his hands. He was alive, but at what cost? He touched the letter from home. Words that once brought hope now carried the weight of memory. Alive. It was a simple word, yet it had become everything. Alive meant remembering the dead. Alive meant enduring the pain. Alive meant facing tomorrow, whatever it may bring. Faces haunted him. Friends who had laughed, joked, dreamed, now silent in the mud. Elias carried them with him, not as ghosts, but as reminders of sacrifice. Of survival, of the cost of life in a world gone mad. He looked across the battlefield. Craters smoked, broken earth stretching endlessly. War had no end, only moments of silence between storms of fire. And he had survived them all. In his eyes, the boy who had left the village was gone. In his eyes, the man who remained had been forged by mud, blood, and fire, hardened, scarred, alive. He was no hero. He was a survivor, and that was enough. The world had claimed so much. Dreams. Friends. Innocence. But in the silence after the storm, he found something fragile yet undeniable. Life. Survival. Presence. And for now, that had to be enough. The day would end, the night would fall. Tomorrow, the world would demand more, and Elias would endure again. For survival was not an act of courage. It was the only choice he had left. The battlefield was quiet. For now, Elias Kovač survived, scarred, hollowed, but alive. And in a world carved by war, that alone was a testament to endurance, to survival. To humanity refusing to break completely.